All right. Back again with another episode of Clean Breakthrough. We have an exciting episode today. We have a guest joining us. Cole is out. We replaced him with Mr. Scott Pressley. Happens to be Scott's 4 years today. 4 years.
Wow, 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 wow.
Woo, woo. Big deal. Also, Scott, not only being a guy in recovery, he is the program director at Greenville Transitions. So I figured what we could do today is a little blend of digging into Scott's personal recovery story, as well as kind of digging into what he does at GT, what he sees on a daily basis, and how he puts up with me and especially Lucas. So Scott, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, man. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me on the podcast. Been looking forward to it for a while now, so this is awesome.
Sweet. Well, let's start off with some basics of I don't know, like drug of choice, how old you were when you got sober, if it took one time, several times. What are some of the basics about you?
Yeah, so first drug of choice, I guess, would have been alcohol. I started drinking when I was a freshman in college. That's when my career really kicked off. Didn't do anything in high school or before that. And then it became in my 20s, it was alcohol and uppers. So there was, excuse me, cocaine and meth and basically Adderall, and which is funny because I was prescribed Adderall, but like I would also abuse it. So anything I could get my hands on that was like an upper would be something that was like my choice. Um, and that was all through my 20s. And then I originally tried to get sober when I was 27. Had a couple DUIs, and everybody said it was time for me to get sober. So I was like, oh, so maybe I should get sober. And I did that. I was, going to 12-step meetings and stuff like that for a couple of years. Um, I would say I probably made it completely sober about 2 years, year and a half to 2 years. Um, and I started smoking pot again, which pot was kind of always part of my story, kind of like alcohol was, but it was just like an outlier um, because it had the counter effects of the uppers. So I didn't, I only used it to like basically go to sleep at the end of the night. That was what I used it for. But then it became my main drug of choice for about 2 years because I convinced myself I didn't have a problem with that drug. It was just the alcohol and the uppers. And so I started smoking pot, and then I didn't have a problem with pot until I ran out you know, of pot. And then I had a problem. And I couldn't get any more. And then it became, okay, well, I know what I can get that will at least make me feel better and not make me be on edge or whatever. And so I started drinking again because it was accessible and, um, it was slow at first, but that only lasted for a couple of weeks. And then it was really back like wide open again. And so that was from probably 30 or 31 years old until I got sober 4 years ago. So that would have been um, 30 years old to 38 years old. So 8 years of that.
I got a question for you because
Sure.
we are not cut from the same cloth. Because I was more of a downer guy. Like I feel like if this were like the baseline energy level, I was like already up here. So uppers and we didn't mix well. I always wanted something to bring me down. As a kid or like in your youth, did you notice, like, did you always have kind of depleted energy levels and you felt you needed that boost? Or like, what were the uppers doing for you? I guess is my question.
Yeah. So it wasn't necessarily energy. It was more what it did to my brain. So um, I've always thought really fast, talked really fast, been able to memorize things really quickly. Just like my brain worked pretty fast, sometimes for good, sometimes for not. And so when I was 11 or 12 years old, they diagnosed me with ADD, and started putting me on Ritalin. And I remember when I started taking that stuff, that like how my brain felt. And it was almost just like you took all these things that were firing in different directions, and then you could like laser focus them. And I could really, really like hyper focus on stuff, um, and really go, basically like trying to max out my brain's power. And that's really what I used it for. And then all the other uppers that came in afterwards, the cocaine and the meth and stuff like that, that was all part of the same. That's the high that I was looking for, was just that hyper brain activity. That's what made me feel smarter. It made me feel, um, just better all around. And it also, in turn, allowed me to drink way more than I should have been able to, because it just blacked all that out. Um, and it was, almost counterproductive, not counterproductive, but counterproductive in a good way, because it balanced all that out so that I could drink as much as I wanted to.
So, a lot of times when we're talking about using substances or abusing substances, especially in like all the guys we work with, there's always fears and insecurities attached to it. Can you explain, like, if any at all, like what that looked like for you? Was it a covering up fears of like, oh, so I seem smarter than these people, or so I can have the energy and be the life of the party because I'm normally not? Like, was there anything like that, or it was solely just like for selfish reasons of like, no, I just want to maximize my brain's potential?
No, the insecurity for me had been around prior, way before drugs and alcohol ever entered the picture. There was always insecurity. There was like this strive for perfection that I always had when I was younger, that was always unattainable. And a little bit of that I had, um, parents that were looking for me to be not perfect, but always wanted me to kind of, they always wanted me to do my best. And a lot of times I took that as wanting me to be perfect. And I think that's where a lot of my insecurity came from as well. And again, I don't think that they were like forcing me to be somebody that I wasn't. They just saw my potential and said, hey, you're pretty intelligent as a kid, so you should be able to do these things. And then when I couldn't do those things because I couldn't focus or because of whatever other reason, then it definitely became like an insecurity issue at that point. And the drinking was definitely came into play to cover up insecurity and to cover up fear, and to be able to talk to women the way that I wanted to talk to women, to make jokes the way that I wanted to make jokes, and to exist in friend groups the way that I wanted to exist in friend groups, which was, yes, to be like the life of the party, um, because I was, naturally like a funny human being, like somebody that looked for humor in all situations. But I was always scared to put it out there, because the last thing that I wanted was somebody to, call me out on something or to make fun of something that I did, because that was just, especially when I was, a teenager and under, was just like detrimental to everything that I did. So if somebody, all it took was like one person to say, man, you sound stupid, or that joke's not funny, or whatever, and I would immediately just like shut down. And and drinking basically allowed me to not care as much about what those people thought, and to could just continue to try to be funny and try to be part of a bigger group. And the uppers made my brain fire faster, so it made me think faster and think on my feet and be wittier. But it also allowed me to drink more, so I could consistently just keep that insecurity pushed down as far as I could. Um, and then, of course, as soon as the next day came around or the next morning came around, the insecurity came back tenfold.
Mm.
Um, and it was just because then what did I do last night? And then you start to hear about what you did last night and all the things that happened. And it's just mounts and mounts and mounts. And then it's like, okay, well, the only way to get rid of this is to drink and do more uppers, or smoke and drink or do whatever I can do to just not feel feelings anymore. Because I didn't know how to process it and I didn't know how to handle it. Um, and never really looked for any good coping mechanisms, never really talked to anybody about it, just straight up went for that solution. And honestly thought that was the only solution for a very long time.
Yeah. So thinking back to from like 4 years ago to this day, was there any big precipitating event or thing that any big thing that happened that you were like, I gotta get help, or your mom or someone was like, he's got to get help? Did someone step in? Did you make that decision on your own?
Oh, he's
We
got.
got
What's that?
I said he's got one.
Oh yeah, I had a pretty big reason. Um, it was so my second career, as I call it, in drinking and doing drugs was mainly just drinking and smoking a little pot here and there, and so I drank so much, and I drank every single day, like all hours of the day, and did like a ton of damage to my body, um, way more damage than I ever did drinking and doing all those drugs. Excuse me. And so when I did that, I ended up getting into a situation to where my body was failing me, and I couldn't figure out why. Like I didn't know what was going on, or maybe I didn't want to know what was going on. It was really easy to tell that something was happening that was bad, and even I knew that it was definitely a direct result of the alcohol that was doing it all. So it wasn't like I could hide from myself too much. But I had been in touch with my sister, uh, who had just had my nephew. He was like a little less than a year old, and she was the last family member that was kind of talking to me at that point. Everybody else was done with the 20-year-old games. These games that have been going on for 20 years. And she had actually said, I think maybe you should try going to rehab this time or going to treatment because you didn't do that before, and maybe that'll help. And I actually agreed to it. And this was like 5 days before my big event happened. And then I got up one day, and I lived in like a townhouse that had stairs going up to the bedroom, and I walked gingerly down those stairs, and that was the last time that I was able to walk up those stairs. And then 12 hours later, um, I drank my last drink, and that was the last time that I was able to like get up off the floor. And so it was the craziest thing because I would go and to like push myself up on the couch, and I would push as hard as I could push, and there was nothing. Like my body just didn't respond. It was the craziest feeling. And so I thought this was it. I thought like, okay, this is how it's going to end. And I sat there for like 2.5 days, almost 3 days, in the floor, not being able to eat, not being able to go to the bathroom, like none of that. And finally, I, you know, I don't know what it was. I mean, I have an idea of what it was. It was, something greater than me that made me pick up the phone and call my sister. And I asked her, I said, can you take me to your house and keep an eye on me until we can get this treatment thing squared away and I can go there? And she said, why would I need to keep an eye on you? And I said, well, because I can't get out of the floor. And she said, I'm going to come pick you up and we're going to take you to the emergency room. And they did. And they drew blood in the emergency room. And the little girl drew my blood, went away, came back 20 minutes later and said, I need to draw your blood again because something's wrong with the numbers. They're not right. And I was like, okay, sure. Drew my blood again and came back with a doctor in tow the next time. And that's when I found out that my hemoglobin, which is like blood volume in your body, was in the tank. Basically, I had like a quarter tank of blood in my body. And your body just can't operate like that, which is why I hadn't been able to function or move. And anytime I could even get up to my knees, I would like black out because there wasn't enough, blood going through my body. Turns out I had like internal bleeding going on from all the drinking I'd done. It kind of destroyed all the esophageal varices and stuff in here. Um, so I was pretty much in a point or in a situation where I didn't have a choice. Um, I it sounds a little dark, but I couldn't die. And so like my choice was living and living with what I had going on. And so I was like, well, I'll just go to treatment then. And we got it set up for me to go to treatment. I had to use a walker for the entire time that I was in treatment. I was 38 years old using a walker just to be able to stand up and walk from point A to point B. Um, but it was really in treatment where I started to, when you can't like walk around much, like you end up having conversations with staff a lot because the staff are the ones that are trying to make sure that you don't like fall over and stuff. And so I started talking to the behavior techs and the nurses and stuff like that a lot. And that was where the light finally started to shine a little bit. And I was like, okay, well, if I manage to get this, stick with this, maybe that that kind of work is something I might want to do. So those little things came in to where I started to feel better, obviously, even though I was having trouble walking. And it was almost like I had a plan or just something that I could work towards when it came to like working in recovery or something like that. And that was kind of my like aha moment to where I just started to try, and wanted something more than, a slow anguishing like release. I wanted to like give it a shot and try to make something of a life that I hadn't made anything of so far.
Yeah. So you're 38 years old. You're 38 in treatment. What did that treatment look like for you? Like, was it a 30-day, a 60-day, a 90-day? Also, like, you were at your house drinking all the time. Your sister had to come get you, but I didn't hear anything about like a job. Did you have to call a job and quit or say like, hey, did you have anything like that going on? I'm just trying
Yeah,
to talk through the transition of like where you were at into treatment and what that treatment looked like.
sure. Yeah. So I did have a job. I worked for a property management company in Clemson at the time, and it's so funny because I talked to them like a year after I'd gone to treatment, and they said, we just thought you were sick. We didn't realize what was really going on. We just thought you had like a sickness or something like that. But I did have to let them know that that I wouldn't be back. The treatment that I went to was a 30-day treatment, um, and it was like a detox and treatment center all in one. And so I ended up being there for 37 days total. And the greatest part about the company that I worked for, I got really lucky. It's like a mom and pop property management company. So like smaller, is like 6 or 7 employees total, including myself. And I wasn't going to have a job when I got out because I was the office administrator. So it's really hard to go almost a month and a half without an office administrator. Also, not even knowing if I could do my job when I got back. And, I wasn't one of those people that was going to be like, no, you have to give me an opportunity to come back. Like I was basically like, I get it, 100% get it. But what they did for me is something that I probably can't ever repay is they let me pay for and keep the company insurance that I had with them. And so what that allowed me to do was it allowed me to afford to go to a really decent treatment center for those 37 days. And so, yeah, the treatment center was, you know, get up in the morning, early in the morning, you do um, meds and breakfast, and then we did groups all day long. And at night we would get like an hour where we could like watch TV and wind down. But it was just groups and 12-step meetings and groups and different other like other types of recovery involved. There was yoga and meditation, a lot of self-reflection, just a ton of different angles that they came at it with. Um, but yeah, that transition, that's what that looked like. I did have to call that company, and my parents helped with that a lot because I wasn't really in like a really good condition to talk to them. So my parents were the ones that worked out. My dad actually is the one that worked out like the insurance stuff with them, that allowed me to go to treatment. And it was funny because I almost did not get any of it paid for, excuse me, even with insurance, because insurance was basically like, we want you to go to detox. You should have gone to detox first and then treatment, but you haven't drank in like a week and a half or whatever. And the treatment center was nice enough to convince my insurance company, like, no, he did his detox in ICU, so it's okay. So you guys already paid for that, so that can count as his detox. So that's how that happened. But that's what my transition looked like into treatment.
Isn't that crazy? That like you would when you go to insurance to say, hey, can you pay for my treatment? And they're like, well, we see you haven't drank for a week and a half. I mean, you must be fine. It's like, well, I haven't drank in a week and a half because I was dying of alcoholism in the hospital. It's like that the week and a half is what can show that I really, 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 really need treatment. Maybe even more so than just like the average person trying to quit drinking. It's just so funny how they can look at just kind of numbers like that of like, well, you've been sober for a week and a half. Just go to 12 step. You got it.
Right.
Go on, little buddy.
Yeah, because it didn't fit into this little box that they had,
Mhm.
designed for what treatment is supposed to look like in their mind. And it's supposed to be 7 days of detox and then, 30 days of treatment. And it's blah, 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 blah. And if it's not that, then, oh, well, then we can't possibly cover that because you don't even really need it. So, yeah, it is
Mhm.
funny how that works.
Oh, yeah. And then, so then you leave treatment. And by the end of treatment, are you walking without the walker?
Yeah. So the last 2 days of treatment, it's the way that treatment works is like you have almost like a phase out process, where you go to an apartment that they have and you live in that apartment for a few days, kind of giving you, it's almost like a step up house or a step down house, however you want to look at it, but it's like an apartment. So me and a couple of other guys were in this apartment together for a few days. And the last 2 days I was there, I actually walked without a walker. So it was 35 days with a walker and then 2 days without. Um, so I gave up the walker and luckily never had to go back to that. But excuse me, spent a lot of time relearning how to walk and how to like stand up out of a seated position and just like a lot of things that you don't think about or take for granted, for being able to do. And it also didn't help that I was, technically considered, what is it, an old person. And so like your body's already fighting against you when you're getting close to 40 of just like, hey, things don't come as easy as they used to. So there was a lot of that going on. But yes, I was very lucky to be able to walk whenever I left treatment. And that way I could, kind of go into the next phase, minus the walker, which was very nice.
Yeah. And so you got your wheels back and and then you went to sober living, right?
Yeah, so they gave me a choice when, they have like the coordinators and everything at the treatment center, kind of like, aftercare. What do you want to do? What are you thinking? They were like, do you want to go to a sober living, or do you want to go back home and go to like an IOP or a PHP or something like that? And I knew this is the first time I ever made like a really good decision for myself, I think, in sobriety. I was like, if I go back home and try to just do IOP, I was like, that's not going to work. I was like, I'm going to drink again. I can tell you right now, because I knew if I went back to the environment that I left, um, and the state of that apartment that I lived in is a whole other story that that is not a good story. Um, but I said, I need to go to a sober living. Like I can't go back to what I was doing. And so they found a sober living, that I could go to that was decently close to where my family was. That was really the only thing I was like, it doesn't have to be in the same town. I just want to be able to like see my family occasionally if they'll have me, and do that kind of stuff. And so I found a sober living in Greenville and went there. Um, and I did that I was in that sober living for 6 months. It was an apartment that I lived in with four other guys. Had a roommate in the bed next to me in like one of those little apartment rooms, which was great. But honestly, like I never, even in sober living, even when it's like cramped and there's five guys in a 3 bedroom, 2 bath apartment, and all the stuff that's going on, I didn't have, necessarily all of the freedoms that I could have had if I had just gone back and gone to IOP. Like I never regretted it for a minute because it was just like at that time, like especially a month or so into, um to sober living, I had pretty much convinced myself that, you know, whatever they say I need to do, or whatever other people who have been through this say that I need to do, I'm going to listen to what they say. And I'm going to try to do that stuff. Because clearly everything I've done before or tried to do before has not only not worked, but like failed miserably. So I really want to try to, start from scratch and do it right and see if I can. And so there was, a lot of that going on in my head, which was good stuff, and I would occasionally run into the thoughts of, yeah, but you're almost 40 years old. How are you going to restart at 40 years old? Like you're halfway through your life if you're lucky, that kind of stuff. But luckily all of those thoughts were soon taken over by seeing the good that this was doing, seeing how good I felt, and just seeing, starting to see more and more light at the end of the tunnel, the further that I went into sober living.
What stands out to me, as it sounds like the switch flipped for you pretty early, or the aha moment, if you will, of like, gosh, I really need to make these changes in my life. Sounded like that happened in kind of the first 30 days. Whereas for me, when I look at my personal journey, it was like 8-9 months into being in like a structured, supportive environment and community before I was able to have that moment of, I had a few moments of like, oh, maybe I should do this. Maybe I should continue this way of life. But it was like 9 months in before I was like, I got to do this. I've got to switch my lifestyle to this one of recovery. And it's just so fascinating of the difference there. Like, is it an age thing? Because I was 23, you were 38. My prefrontal cortex has not developed as much as yours had at that point. Or was it the severity of the low that you hit? I hate the term rock bottom, but like when I think about my low, when I made a choice to go to treatment, and your low, like mine was mental up to that point, but yours was very physical. Like your body was failing you. But it's always fascinating to think through, like, what caused the switch to flip for you much earlier on in the journey than for me. But like, what would you say? What, Lucas?
I was gonna say he had like from what I know, and I've known you for coming up on 4 years now, but I feel like it's like the perfect storm of willingness. That it's like the age was there, the previous attempt at sobriety was there, and like maybe stuff to kind of be like, all right, so if I do 12-step again, I'm going to do it like this because this is the stuff I was doing, this is the stuff I wasn't doing, or this is what kind of led to it. The huge physical medical event, of like losing 3/4 of the tank is a nice way of saying it, but when you really think about it, like that's wild. To even like survive that. I mean, you could see a lot of people having something like that happen and it being just like new lease on life, whatever. And then I know also with your nephew being born, that was a big one too, of like being an uncle and your sister talking to you about like, hey, like you're not going to be in this kid's life if you don't like get your shit together. And so I feel like all these things together just happen to be this like perfect storm of willingness. And then also like insurance lined up so you could go to treatment, like the right sober living lined up to go back to Greenville. Like everything just kind of like fell in front of you. And something that I always say is that like you have like one of the most like perfect yet like boring recovery stories. Like the entry into it is really interesting, and there's like all this stuff going on, but then it's like it switched for you so early that you don't have those like as many of those early stories as maybe someone who like David or I, who like struggled for like 9 or 10 months, where a sponsor's like talking to them and they're like, dude, do this. And you wouldn't believe what my sponsor went and did, like that kind of stuff. Cause you were just so ready that it was like, hey, do this. You went and did it. Do this. You went and did it. What do you think about me doing this? I don't think it's a good idea. You didn't go do it. Like everything was just like by the book, cause that switch had happened so early. And I think it like benefited you so much and like shot you ahead of the game because you were just doing everything and you were so willing at every turn. But I feel like that's so unique for that perfect storm of willingness to be there, because normally there's some piece of it that's missing where you kind of take your will back. And like you said, like for 5 guys, for a guy to not have anything to complain about in a sober living period, crazy. For an apartment-based sober living with 5 guys in a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment, even crazier, because like even if it's the curfew or they're going to drug test us or I can't do this or I can't do that, yeah, then you put two people in one of those like small apartment bedrooms. And I mean, there's so much stuff that could kick up. You were a solo guy living in a townhouse by yourself. Like, I just need to get back to that. And I need more space and I need my me time, you know, all the stuff we hear. So like just the willingness is what shines through at every step of the story from when you got sober to me.
Yeah, I got very lucky in that sense. I think age had a lot to do with it. Um, Age and what brought me into sobriety this time, like all the physical damage and stuff that I'd done. You know, my nephew was definitely a big factor in early sobriety of just like this is something that, um I want to be a part of this kid's life, and I need to be a part of his life. Because at the time I was having all the thoughts of like, I don't even know that I'm ever going to be like a father or have kids of my own. So, I can at least maybe, and like this also is like, he turned a year old while I was in treatment. So it's just like, that kid's never going to know me as a drunk or a drug user, like ever, if I can stay on this path, So I've got one, at least one person so far that doesn't know that that's who I was. Um, but yeah, the age thing I think is where a lot of the willingness came from. It's also where a lot of the gratitude came from because I'd lived like a lot more life than a lot of the guys that I was running into. Like a lot of younger guys haven't had a bunch of jobs, haven't paid their own way, haven't lived on their own, haven't had to buy car insurance and buy a car and like learn how to switch the tag and title over for that. And like all of these life experiences that I had that a lot of people that I run into still to this day, especially early in sobriety, when they're early in sobriety, they haven't had those experiences, and I get to listen to them complain about some of those things. And to me, I just laugh because I think the good thing for me was I had enough experience with life sucking, just like life in general can suck. And like I knew that just because I'd lived a lot of life compared to a lot of people. And so for me to complain about little things, it was just like, I was kind of used to that stuff. I was used to inconveniences. I was used to, life kind of being hard sometimes. And I think that made my life in sobriety a lot easier, and it made it easier to see the good things that came. And so, like, while I didn't have as many um, back and forths or didn't have as much unwillingness in the beginning, um, I replaced a lot of that with like recognizing things that happened to me in my sober living that I still think of as like really cool little moments that happen, along the way. Um, and I think the more I definitely like feed off of those moments a lot. And so anytime like one of those good little moments popped up, no matter how small, um, I could use that and like I could almost like live off of that for a little while until like another one came along, you know. And speaking of luck, I mean, I went to that sober living and my great aunt had passed away the year before and left me like $14,000 in like a savings account or whatever for like inheritance. Um, and I used every dime of that to pay for sober living. So that's how I afforded sober living because I didn't have a job. I didn't have any money saved up. But I used that money to pay the, however much it was a month for sober living for 6 months and to get back on my feet. Um, and then like and Lucas, you know this, but the story of the guy that was my roommate whenever I walked into the sober living, um, that I'd known the guy that was my roommate, who I still have as a roommate, oddly enough. I've known him since I was like 12 years old. And we were really good friends, like went to church together and all those families, good friends. And then we literally took completely separate paths, but like parallel paths, and ended up in the same sober living together, in the same bedroom together. Um, and, it's another one of those just like aha kind of moments. Like there's something bigger than me at work here, that's kind of putting all this stuff together. So again, another one of those moments that I can feed off that stuff. And so I think that's where my continued willingness came. Now, I wasn't like the perfect little, sober student, didn't always do exactly what I was supposed to do. Didn't always, do exactly what my sponsor said to do or said not to do. Um, there's still many of occasions where I had to call myself out for things that I'd done. And then, deal with the not necessarily consequences, but just the like, yeah, that's probably not the smartest way to go about that. So there was a lot of that still. But the little things and just the overall being willing, I think I just like, for lack of a better term, I'd given up. Like there was, I was this was the last train stop. Like there was nowhere else to get off at for me. That was it. And so I could either do this or I could just go back to being miserable. And, and that was the other thing is just like anything that was better than where I came from was good. And when I started to get relationships back with like family and friends, when I started to, when I got jobs and was able to like hold jobs and then started to work in recovery and things like that, all of these things just made me feel so much better than I'd ever felt before. And so that stuff was what like I held on to more than anything and still hold on to. And, that really keeps my willingness open, is seeing like, because I remember every detail of how bad it was. And I remember exactly how all that felt. And so whatever I can do to not go back to that, I'm going to do. And, hopefully my mentality continues to stay that way. But, that's what it's done for me so far is, being able to use those little bright spots to, jump off of and build off of is what I've done.
Yeah, and it's as you were talking about like the younger guy versus the older guy, it was making me think that when you've like had kind of like a normal, not like normal, but like when you get into like the rhythm of like life, outside of your parents' house, like adult life, car insurance, car payments, all the stuff you were listing, sober living and like treatment and like getting sober can feel more of like the break that it is of just like, oh my God, like you're looking at these young guys of like, you don't know how sweet this is, dude. Like for 6 months, I don't got to worry about all this crazy life stuff. And I can just focus on getting sober and going to meetings and like, what a gift, But what to like the younger guy, it's just like, man, I don't got to do any of that stuff. This is just a break from my like drinking and drugging, which I'm trying to get back to. And I just feel like the lifestyle differences are so stark, that's why you have these totally different perspectives on like maybe like gratitude for being there versus like this is just holding me back in life. Like, you guys don't even know. When in reality, it's like, well, my mom pays my car insurance, my dad pays my cell phone bill. I live in their basement, blah, 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 whatever, and so on. This kind of feels like a downgrade.
Yeah. I always think it's funny too, when, some of the guys I work with and just people in general in recovery that I run into that are like 22, 23 years old. And they're just like, I mean, how the hell am I supposed to do this for 6 months, dude? Like that's like 6 months out of my life. And I'm just like, dude, you are 22 years old. You need to calm down. All right. I had to take 6 months or however long out of my life to do treatment and sober living at 38, and I thought my life was done at that point, like I'm an old guy at that point. So it's funny that dynamic is so different. But it's great because I love having that perspective that I can give to them. I'm just like, dude, your life, you can start over right now in your 20s and literally build a life that's so good that nobody will remember what happened before you got sober. And I even have that opportunity. And I was an old guy when I did it, but I have the opportunity to just, put enough good in the bank from now until whenever, that I don't have to live off of what my past was like. And so just trying to pass that message along. But it is funny how you know how they think that life is over or this is the biggest inconvenience in the world because I might have to wait a year before I date somebody. I'm 22 years old, dude. I'm in my prime. And it's just like I had to wait a year too, and I was like 38 years old. So calm down. It's okay. You're gonna live. But yeah, I definitely see that dynamic, and um, it definitely helps a lot, especially when dealing with other people who are younger than me, in sobriety, and just being able to give them that perspective. Just like, did you know how different it could be, but how great you have the opportunity to be, and how much better, it's almost like don't do what I did. Don't wait till you're 38 to figure it out. I tell guys that all the time. Figure it out now. Figure it out right now, and don't waste time. And obviously, I can't force anybody to figure it out, but that's always my advice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's wild too, because if you're 22 and you get sober, by the time you're 38, you got 16 years, right, sober in the bank, and obviously everything that can come with that if you're doing the work. But so, what does work look like when you get back into that in sober living? You were selling something online, right, or over the phone when you first got sober?
I want to make a comment really quick before we move on to that.
Yeah.
Something that I heard him say that's crazy to me, and Scott said that, like, I can just remember every detail of how bad it was. Now, 4 years later, you can remember those vivid details, which is crazy to think about, because I think in my mind, it's like addiction is the only thing that happens with. But if you think of other, for me, like tragic events, like I think back to a night where I got beat up, I got jumped by a group of people who were on drugs and drunk. As close to the event as I was, like a day later, I remembered every detail of that event and how tragic it was and scary and traumatic. But like now, years later, it's tough for me to remember that event. But with addiction, it's almost the more time that passes, the further you get away from it, the more you can look back and see the detail of like how miserable your life was. But when you're in it, when you're just a day away from it, your brain is still tricking you of like, nah, this 10% of the day where we're getting high is worth it. See how fun this is, even though the other 90% you're absolutely miserable, trying to figure out like where you're getting your next fix, how are you getting it, what's it going to cost you, where are you going to get the money, who are you going to have to fight to get it, But
yeah, for sure. Like I definitely noticed that, the further that I get away from it, the more it helps me to remember what it was like. But also just there's that stark contrast of like what my life looks like day to day right now versus what my life looked like then. And just the volume of stress that I've taken away from myself by doing the work that I do in recovery, on myself and with others, is like I just think back to how awful like I used to feel and how stressful my life used to be. And now, like, I've heard people in meetings call them uh, Cadillac problems or first world problems, and that's what my problems are these days. Like, I don't have bad problems. I don't have to worry about, who am I going to steal money from to get what I need, or how am I going to go steal this from somebody, or how am I going to make this work, or how am I going to live, or how am I going to eat. I don't have to worry about any of that stuff. But it's all because of the work that I put in since I've been sober. So it's really easy to look back on how bad it was, and just, yeah, it stays burned into my brain. And it's a good reminder. But yeah, so as far as work and sober living went, I couldn't. At first, I thought, this can show you how genius your early thinking or early sobriety thinking can be. I was like, I should work from home. My walking is not great. I'm still learning how to walk. I should get a work from home job, thinking that was going to magically find the only really good work from home job that there was. And I didn't. I found a job that has like massive turnover, and they'll just hire anybody that can put two sentences together to sell um, internet TV packages and like cell phone stuff. And you're not cold calling, but you might as well be cold calling. You're basically getting cold transferred. So you're getting these people transferred to you that have no idea that they're about to have to talk to you. They were just trying to get their power set up with Duke Energy or Blue Ridge or whoever. And then they get transferred to you. And I'm like, so what do you think about Comcast? Huh? You want some internet to go with your new house? And it's like, and a lot of these areas were really rural. So it's like these people are just like, dude, I barely have enough money to get my lights turned on. I don't want to listen to you talk about this, that, and the other. So it was definitely humbling. And there's not a lot about sobriety that I've disliked, but I really disliked that job. Like I dare say I hated it. You know, but I got really lucky. The first sponsor I had when I moved to Greenville called me one day, and he actually worked at a treatment center locally, and was like, you know, and I had expressed to him the thoughts that I talked about earlier, where I'd talked to the people at the treatment center that I went to, the staff, and had thought like maybe this is something I can do and be good at, you know, with my life. And so he obviously knew that, and he called me and said, "You still think you want to work in recovery?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, and I was 8 months sober, I guess at the time, 8 or 9 months sober. He said, "All right, well, I might have a job for you." And I said, "Okay." He said, "You'd have to work overnight though." And I was like, "Don't care." And he was like, "And, you know, wouldn't be able to pay you a lot starting off, but, you know, maybe we can get you to like day shift and pay you more." I was like, "Cool, sounds good to me." Cause I was anything to get out of that job that I was in. But also, like, he even made the point when he was talking to me, he's like, "This is a foot in the door. This will like get you in the door of working in recovery, if it's really something you want to pursue." And he was like, "All right, well, just, you know, see whenever you can work your last day with the other job." And this was a Thursday. And I emailed one of my 38 bosses that I had with that job, and was just like, "Hey, so I need to put in my 2 weeks notice. So what would my last day be?" And they were just like, "Your last day can be tomorrow." I was like, "Fantastic." So I called my sponsor back, and I was like, "Hey man, I can start on Monday." And he was like, "Excellent. So we'll see you on Monday at this time." And that's where I started working in recovery as a behavior tech, as an overnight behavior tech, when I was, you know, 8.5 months sober or something like that.
You stayed with that company for a while, right?
Yeah, 2 years and 2 months.
How did
I was with
you
them.
with them? Like you went from an overnight behavior tech to what?
So I went from an overnight behavior tech to I moved. A day shift opening came open, and they asked me first. They were like, "Look, you know, we think you'd be good on days. Do you want to move to day shift?" And I was like, "Well, yeah." So you know, I was 39, almost 40 years old, working overnight shifts. I was like, "I'll definitely take some day shifts. That'd be great." And I mean, I guess almost became like a day shift supervisor, because we had a lot of new staff, and I'd been there for a little while at the time. I'd been there, which a little while was like 5 months. But, you know, in that line of work, sometimes that's a
That's a
little
long
while.
that's a long time working in treatment. This guy's
Right.
been here
Yeah,
months, man. He's a grizzled veteran.
exactly. So yeah, I worked there. I was the overnight, and then I became like a day shift, and then a day shift supervisor. And then when I'd been there about a year, there was an opening, and I had like a ton of kitchen and restaurant experience from, you know, doing what everybody who does drugs and drinks does. They worked in restaurants for a long time, and I've worked in plenty of them. And there was an opening in the kitchen, and I swore off working in kitchens, or restaurants. I was like, I'm never doing that again, because it's just not a conducive place to recovery usually. But I thought, well, hell, if I'm going to get back into it, I would say a treatment center might be the best place to do that if I wanted to piddle around in the kitchen again. So I took the job as like the sous chef or assistant chef. Um, and I did that for a few months. And then the kitchen manager slash head chef left. And, you know, they came to me and they were basically like, "Look, you're getting first right of refusal when it comes to this. Do you want to take this job?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll take it." And it's funny because when that happened, I had another job offer on the table. Um, and there was a same like working in recovery, but like a different path in recovery, that I would revisit later. And ended up turning that job down because I was getting basically promoted at the company I was with. So it's just funny how that stuff works out. And so then I was the kitchen manager, and I did the kitchen manager thing for 8 months, maybe 9 months, or yeah, 8 or 9 months until I left. And so I was there until the midsummer of 2024. So yeah.
Go ahead, Lucas. Lucas is thinking.
Well, it's funny. I was thinking about that that other job was GT. Because I had tried to get you to come to GT, because I always thought, I was like, man, you'd be such a good coach with our guys. And like the life experience you had and being able to impart that on others and like a relatable, way, and the humility, the willingness, like all the stuff was there. It was like, God, this guy's got to be a coach. Like, um,
Yeah, and for the record, Lucas was coming to me for like a month and a half. He's like, I got the perfect guy if I can convince him.
yeah. And then Scott, I had like had you out to GT, and obviously we knew each other well at this point. And I was like, man, this is great, and you were like almost all the way there, and then totally get it, where you were already at, like big promotion there to like kitchen manager, head chef, and just timing just didn't work out at that time. But I can remember just being like, dang, dude, I was so close.
It was so funny too, because like you and I'd actually had a conversation, and I can't remember if this was like an in-person or on the phone or whatever, but one of the things I actually said was, I think that I get like, unless they offer me something different here, I'm probably going to come there. And that was my thought process. And then,
Dude, that is what happened. You were like,
yes,
unless they offer me like a bunch more money or like a big promotion or something, I mean, I'm good to come to y'all. And then call me back and we're like, they offered me a bunch more money and a big old promotion. I guess I'm gonna have to stay.
right. And it was so funny because I was just like, there's no way he's going to believe this actually happened, even though I knew you would, like,
Yeah.
you could obviously like fact check it, and it did happen. But it was just like, that was just like the perfect imperfect like coincidence that happened at that
Mhm.
time.
Which you
But hey,
always chance whenever someone goes that's already at another job and they're like, hey, I'm thinking about leaving. If they're really good, which you're really good, and that's why two places were fighting over you, then the place you're trying to leave is going to be like, what can we do to keep you, And so they threw a bunch of stuff to keep you because that's how valuable you were to them. So I think all that speaks to just like your work ethic and how you show up, and that you'd even have two places throwing money and accolades at you to be like, please come here. No, don't leave.
Well, and that's another one of those things that like a gift of sobriety and a gift of, being in recovery, and especially like long-term recovery, or the longer that you stay in it, is that you get, like, I never had any of that when I was, drinking or doing drugs. Like I never had two companies that would be like, hey, we really want you to work for us. And I never had two companies that, you know, trusted me to do the job that they wanted me to do, and have faith in me because they knew that I was, or they were presuming that I was capable of the job, and what I could do to help them as a company. I'd never had any of that before. I'd had a lot of people that told me that I was, oh, you're really good at waiting tables, or you're really good at talking to people, or you're really good at this. But like none of that fulfillment, ever happened to where it was just like, um, I never sat down at the end of the day and went, damn, I think I might have made a difference today, or like I did my best today and my best was good enough today. I didn't have any of that before, and those are the things I've gotten, like, in that situation. And then again, that situation basically represented itself like a year later, when Lucas came calling again, and they offered me, the place that I was at offered me more money to stay, offered me potentially different roles and things like that. But at that point, I think that I had kind of seen, I think I kind of reached the ceiling where I was at, or at least in my head. And a lot of people I talked to um, kind of echoed that, of just like, you're going to be kind of confined or pigeonholed if you stay in this role, and it's harder to get out of that. Whereas GT offered me um, a completely different role, um, and a more immersive role in the recovery, like the day-to-day life of people in recovery. And that ultimately sold it for me. And it was, And I hated to tell the other company that, you know, I was leaving. But that's what it came down to. It was just like, you know, this has like, I can go further, and not even as much like go further or like make more money. All those things are great, but I can make more of a difference doing this. And I feel like that I can have more one-on-one interaction with guys in recovery. Um, and, you know, try to impart as much like experience, strength, and hope as I can to as many people as possible. And I think the best opportunity for me to do that is to go here. And so that's what I did.
Yeah. No, I think it I think it checks out. And obviously it's what I believe in. So I'm biased, but and I think anything where you're working with people in recovery, when you're in recovery, you know, can obviously be great. And there's a lot you can share with them. But again, obviously biased, but I have an affinity for like long-term sober living because I think you get to work with people for such a long period of time. Sometimes at least it can feel to me there's a bigger difference to be made when I can spend like 6 months, 7 months to a year with somebody as they get like fully, you know, basically from like detox to us and then all the way back to like them getting their own apartment, picking up a year sober, graduating college, whatever. I think there's a lot more reward. It can feel like there's a lot more reward to it to get to see that change over that period of time. It's also a hell of a lot more frustrating sometimes, you know, because you're just like, God, this guy is just like not getting it for like month after month after month. And then that turn happens. And that's what like makes it all worth it. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, there's two things that I take away from that, especially the one thing that I've heard you, Lucas, say several times, and my the guy that I work for that hired me at the treatment center before, um, he said it to me several times too. It's like, you know, if you're gonna try to take credit for the victories, you got to take credit for the losses too. And so that helps me stay like level when it comes to like the frustrations. It's still extremely frustrating sometimes, and but so was the job before. But I just, you know, long term sober living just gives you, you can just build that relationship, and then you really have a better shot at keeping up with the guys afterwards. And that's the thing that I never had really that much when I worked at the 14-day treatment center that I worked at. It's like 14 days come and then they go, and then, you know, we didn't like have, you didn't exchange phone numbers with them or anything like that because that was kind of taboo anyway, as it should be when somebody's that early in recovery. But for our situation, like, I mean, you're living with these guys, you know, and you're in their day-to-day life, and you're whether you realize it or not, you're a really big part of their lives for a while.
And
Sometimes as much as like a year.
not only their lives, but their families. Like we get to know mom and dad, and it's a much bigger picture.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and that's something in the program director role that I've really seen that difference. I mean, I had met parents before and had like a lot of conversations with parents as a coach. But now doing those two-on-one, I guess you would say, or one-on-one like phone calls with parents and doing updates and really getting to know like their side and kind of the struggles they've been through with their kids, and then, you know, using that as like a being like the liaison between them and their sons and like sober living has been, it's so much more eye-opening, and you get the bigger picture, you get the full picture, you know, of like what their life was like and what it's like now, and, you know, what we should watch out for, the little tales, the little quirks that you may not have known about. And you didn't get any of that in like a, you know, in a 14-day treatment center. You know, you'd be lucky if you get to know like where they went to school or any of that stuff. You know, you're just trying to have conversations about like, you know, don't drink or do drugs today. That's what we were trying to do. You know, don't AMA and go do crazy stuff. Just don't do that. Whereas here, you're building full on relationships with kids, with parents, um, that'll, you know, potentially last forever. You know, and these people will probably remember who you are, and you're definitely going to remember who they are. I mean, I've heard, you know, David and Lucas both talk about, you know, guys that were in the program 7, 8 years ago. Um, remember so and so, and he was like this, and his personality was like this way, and this guy reminds me of him. So that stuff doesn't leave us. Like it sticks with us. And for better or for worse, I think it's always for better that it sticks with us. Sometimes it doesn't work out the way we want it to. But yeah, I wouldn't trade those relationships for anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is crazy. Like like you said, just the depth of the relationships you have with them. And the only guys that I can kind of forget about sometimes, and really all I end up forgetting is their name. Not like even like, yeah, I remember they came for like 2 days and just like rough stuff up and were complaining left and right, and then called mom and dad and got them to pick them up, and then they were gone. Like those guys, I might not remember their names, but I still remember like what those 2 days were like. But then everybody else, I mean, they're kind of seared into your brain. Sometimes whether you want to or not, because maybe it was 3 months or 4 months and it didn't end well, or relapse is a part of it, or whatever stuff that isn't as pleasant to think about, but it's seared in there. And then luckily all those successful guys are seared in there too, where you get to see how they grow and change over 8 years now, going back to like our first guys. And some of them that are like still around the same community, going to meetings, doing the deal is really cool to see.
Yeah, and I think there's one thing that I don't know that a lot of the guys realize, and maybe not a lot of people in general realize about the work that we do, is that we also get something from every one of those guys that comes through, and sometimes a lot, and it's a lot of what a lot of it goes into the strength of our own recoveries. I know for me personally, like every time I have those conversations with guys that are, complaining about the little things, or don't really understand why they need to be sober, or just like any of those conversations that I have, yeah, every time I have one of those conversations, that is, for me, like another boost, another reminder of like why I do what I do, and not just the job that I do, but why do I stay sober, and why am I working this program of recovery, and why am I trying to be consistent and not being complacent? It's so that I don't have to ask those questions anymore, and I don't have to be in that position anymore. I had one of the old guys that ran the sober living that I lived in. This guy named Chuck, and he was hilarious. And he would come in to our bedroom, do morning bed checks, like 7 o'clock in the morning, smelling like a full-on cigarette. Great guy. And he would come and like lean on the dresser we had in our room, and he'd be talking about like something or another, and we would talk about like the old days and like the way things were. And he'd always be like, "Well, the good news is, fellas, y'all ain't got to live that way no more." And so tons of people say that, but it just always sticks with me. It's like, I have a choice every day that I don't have to go back to that. And hearing these guys, what they're going through, dealing with them every day, um, kind of walking them or helping them walk through this program, and helping them, kind of walk through recovery, and their parents, is just a consistent reminder of, okay, this is why I don't want to go back to that. Because I would love to continue to help people. Like I feel like that's what I was put here to do. It just took me a long time and a lot of stupid stuff to figure it out. But B, because I don't want to live that way anymore, because that shit's hard and I don't want to do it anymore. And I like living this way a lot better. And I like these first world Cadillac problems a lot better than I liked than the problems that I had before, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up. We're hitting time now. But Scott, man, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be with us on the podcast, but also just to be with us in general, dude. I feel like you're one of those guys that you joined the team, and now like it's tough to think back on how we made it without you. It's like, dude, how did we do this without Scott here? Because you were just like on top of it and crushing it with the guys. So thanks for everything that you do.
Listen, we're supposed to be deflating egos around here, not inflating egos. I appreciate it. And the last thing I'll say is that something that Lucas told me one time, and I can't remember what job it was that I was talking about, like potentially doing, but I had an opportunity to do something outside of recovery that would have probably paid me more money. And Lucas and I were talking about it, and this was before me working at GT. And he said, "Man, I just feel like that would be a huge waste if you didn't stay in recovery and you went and did something else." So that always sticks with me too. Is just like, hey, that's as much of a boost as I need to let me know and remind me this is what I'm supposed to be doing. So
Yeah.
You're an expert.
hmm.
Good stuff. All right. Well, I appreciate it, guys. We'll end it right there.
All right,
Okay.
cool.